I was knee-deep in garbage when my life changed forever. Not metaphorically, literally. Behind a half-collapsed mansion, I was digging through a dumpster for wood scraps I could turn into furniture when someone said my name. Sophia Hartfield? I nearly dropped the plank in my hands. Nobody had said my name in weeks. Not since I stopped paying rent, lost my apartment, and started living out of a storage unit. When I turned, a woman in a crisp suit stood by the alley's entrance. She looked wildly out of place, manicured, calm, untouched by the filth around us. "That depends," I said, brushing dirt from my sleeve. "Are you here to tow the dumpster or my dignity?" A small smile flickered across her face. "Neither. My name is Victoria Lang. I represent the estate of Theodore Hartfield." The sound of that name hit me harder than the winter wind. "Uncle Theo?" I whispered. "Yes." "I'm sorry. He passed away 6 weeks ago." Everything around me went quiet. The city noise, the rustle of trash, even my heartbeat. I hadn't spoken to him in 10 years, but somehow the world still tilted. Victoria stepped closer. "He left you something," I laughed once, dry and bitter. "A restraining order. His entire estate." My hands went numb. "You're joking." "I'm not." She held out an envelope, the paper thick, official. "You're his only heir. But there's a complication. There's always a complication." She continued. "To receive your inheritance, you must take over as CEO of Hartfield Design Group and run it successfully for 1 year. I stared at her, speechless. 10 years ago, my uncle had thrown me out of his firm and his life when I married a man he said would destroy me. He was right, of course. Richard did destroy me, just slower than anyone expected. "I'm not an architect anymore," I said quietly. Her gaze didn't waver. "Then maybe it's time to remember who you were before someone convinced you otherwise." A gust of wind carried the smell of rotten wood and dust. Behind her, a black Mercedes waited, shining like a promise I didn't trust. I looked down at my hands, cracked, shaking, filthy, and at the envelope that could change everything or ruin what was left of me. "Why me?" I asked. Victoria met my eyes. "Because he believed you'd lost everything except your potential." And just like that, standing in the stink of my own rock bottom, I realized this wasn't an inheritance. It was a test. That night, I couldn't sleep. The envelope sat on the edge of the motel nightstand like it was staring at me, mocking, glowing under the flickering light. I kept rereading the same words until they blurred. Sole heir, 1-year requirement, Hartfield Design Group. My uncle had left me the empire I'd once dreamed of joining. The same empire I'd walked away from 10 years ago. For a man who convinced me love was enough. Richard. I still remember the day I met him. 32. Charming, confident in that way men get when they've never been told no. I was fresh out of architecture school, top of my class full of stupid optimism. He came to one of my exhibitions, stood there pretending to study my work when really, he was studying me. He said he loved how I saw beauty in broken things. Turns out, he just wanted to break one more. At first, he made me feel unstoppable. Then he started deciding what good looked like, how I dressed, where I worked, who I spoke to. "You don't need to prove anything, Soph," he'd say, smiling that fake sincere smile. "You already won the lottery with me." And I believed him. I quit my internship at Hartfield Design Group, my uncle's firm. Uncle Theo called me the next morning. I'll never forget his voice. Low, disappointed, tired. "Tell me you didn't just throw away everything you worked for." "I'm happy," I said. "Isn't that enough?" His silence was the answer. 2 days later, I received a letter, short, formal, final. "You've chosen your path. I wish you peace on it." Richard's peace looked a lot like control. He made me delete my old portfolio, said my dreams were just distractions. He called me ungrateful when I wanted to work. And when I finally caught him cheating, with his assistant, in our house, he called me insane. The divorce drained everything. My savings, my hope, my name. So yeah, now I'm a 32-year-old ex-architect with no address and an inheritance I don't trust. At 3 a.m., I finally stood up, walked to the sink, and looked at myself in the cracked mirror. Dark circles. Messy hair. The face of someone who forgot who she was. But behind that, something else. A spark I hadn't seen in years, I whispered to my reflection. If this is a test, Uncle, I'm going to pass it. The next morning, Victoria's car pulled up outside the motel. Through the window, I saw her step out. Calm, professional, unreadable. I zipped my one suitcase shut, grabbed the envelope, and took a deep breath. Let's go, I said. As the car pulled onto the highway toward New York, I didn't know what scared me more, running a billion-dollar company, or discovering why my uncle really left it to me. New York looked different when you had nothing to lose. Skyscrapers weren't intimidating anymore, just giant reminders that everyone's fighting for space. Money, purpose. As Victoria's car turned onto a quiet, tree-lined street in Manhattan, I felt my stomach twist. At the end of the block stood the Hartfield estate, 5 stories tall. Stone and glass and history woven together like one of Uncle Theo's blueprints come alive. The last time I'd seen it, I was 22, holding Richard's hand and crying while my uncle stood on the porch refusing to come to my wedding. Now, he was gone, and I was coming back alone. Victoria got out first. Welcome home, Ms. Hartfield. Home. That word felt too heavy, too kind. The front door opened before I reached it. An older woman appeared, her face lined but warm, eyes bright like she'd been waiting for me. Sophia, she said softly, you probably don't remember me. It's Margaret. I took care of you when you were little. I froze. I did remember her. The woman who used to sneak me cookies in the study when Uncle Theo worked late, who'd hug me when I missed my parents too much to sleep. Without thinking, I hugged her. Hi, Margaret. Her voice broke a little. He never stopped talking about you. Even when you weren't speaking, he'd say, she'll come home when she's ready. I swallowed hard. He really said that? Every year, she nodded. And 8 years ago, he turned the top floor into your studio. Said you'd need it someday. That stopped me cold. My studio? She led me upstairs. Each floor smelled faintly like cedar and old books. When we reached the 5th floor, she opened a door, and my breath caught. It was a designer's dream. Wide drafting tables, shelves of untouched sketchbooks, expensive software still in its box, and pinned on one wall, my old college exhibition sketch. The same one Uncle Theo had called the future. I walked over slowly and touched the paper, tracing the faded pencil lines. My hand trembled. He kept all this? I whispered. Margaret smiled sadly. He said your talent wasn't gone, just waiting. I blinked back tears. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Behind me, Victoria's voice cut through the silence. We meet the board tomorrow. You'll want to rest tonight. I turned, still staring at the sketch. Tell me something, Victoria. Why did he trust me to lead his company? She looked at me for a long moment before answering. Because he knew no one else had lost enough to appreciate what it takes to rebuild. As she left, I stood alone in that studio, surrounded by ghosts, blueprints, and the faint smell of old ambition. And somewhere deep inside, I could almost hear him whisper, "Prove them wrong, Soph." I barely slept. The city hummed outside the window of the guest room, a constant low rhythm that didn't care who I was or what I'd lost. By morning, I felt like a fraud wearing borrowed skin. Margaret had laid out a navy suit from one of the wardrobe boxes my uncle had left for me. Her quiet way of saying, "You still belong here." At 8 a.m., Victoria's knock echoed through the hallway. The car's ready. The drive to Hartfield Design Group felt like a trip back to a version of myself I'd buried a decade ago. The building sat on a corner in Midtown, all glass and light, the kind of place you look at and know someone brilliant dreamed it first. My uncle had built this, his masterpiece. Inside, people in tailored clothes moved fast, voices sharp and confident. I could feel their eyes on me, the woman who'd traded blueprints for broken furniture. Victoria leaned close. "They know you're coming. Try not to let them see doubt." "Too late," I muttered. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor. Waiting near the boardroom was a man in his late 30s, tall, composed, the kind of face that had both warmth and precision. "Jacob Sterling," he said, extending his hand. "Senior partner. I worked with your uncle for 12 years. I recognize the name. You designed the East Harbor Museum." He blinked, surprised. "You know my work?" "I know everyone's," I said quietly. "I just stopped practicing, not paying attention." Something flickered in his expression. Maybe respect, maybe curiosity. Victoria opened the boardroom door. "They're waiting." 8 people sat around a polished table, polished in every sense. Suits, pens, cold stares. The air felt heavy with unspoken judgment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began. "This is Sophia Hartfield, the new CEO of Hartfield Design Group." Murmurs rippled. One man, mid-50s, expensive watch, arrogance radiating like cologne, leaned back in his chair. "With respect," he said, "Ms. Hartfield has never worked a day in this firm, or in any firm from what I gather. This decision feels sentimental," I smiled tightly. "You must be Mr. Carmichael. My uncle mentioned you in his letters." He smirked. "All good things, I hope. Not really." That earned a few stifled laughs. Even Jacob's mouth twitched. I placed a notebook on the table, one of 17 I'd brought from my storage unit. "This is one of my designs. A sustainable housing project built around adaptive reuse. Old buildings reborn instead of replaced." Carmichael flipped through the pages, unimpressed. "Pretty sketches don't make a CEO." "You're right," I said. "But vision does. And courage. My uncle didn't build this firm by playing safe. He built it by betting on people everyone else underestimated." I looked straight at him. I guess he's still doing that. Silence filled the room. Then softly, Jacob said, "Welcome to Hartfield, Ms. Hartfield." When the meeting ended, Victoria leaned toward me. "You made enemies today," I nodded. "Good. Means they noticed I'm here." But as I looked out at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows, one thought burned through the fear. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving my uncle right. By the end of my first week, I'd learned 3 things. Carmichael hated me, Jacob didn't, and everyone else was waiting to see which of us would win. Hartfield Design Group wasn't just a firm. It was a battlefield with glass walls. Every conversation sounded polite but felt like a trap. Every compliment came with a blade tucked behind it. Carmichael, in particular, had a way of making Ms. Hartfield sound like incompetent intruder. On Thursday morning, I found an email from him marked urgent. Effective immediately, all design decisions require board approval before client presentation. I read it twice, jaw tightening. That wasn't how my uncle had run things. He trusted his architects to take risks. This policy wasn't about procedure. It was about control. Jacob stopped by my office with a cup of coffee. "You saw it too?" "Oh, I saw it," I said. "He's not even subtle. Carmichael never is. He's testing how much you'll tolerate." I stared at my computer, at the blinking cursor daring me to do something. Then I hit reply all. Policy rejected. Hartfield Architecture succeeded because Theodore Hartfield trusted his designer's expertise. Board approval remains required only for projects exceeding $10 million as per the company charter. Sophia Hartfield, CEO. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "That'll sting." "Good," I said. "Let him bleed a little." An hour later, my phone buzzed. Meeting request, Carmichael. Of course. When he walked into my office, he didn't sit. "You're undermining my authority." "No," I said calmly. "I'm reinstating my uncle's." "I've been here 23 years, he said, voice tight. "I own 30% of this company. I won't watch you destroy it." I leaned back in my uncle's old leather chair, heart pounding but voice steady. "Then don't watch. Work with me. But if you can't, the door's that way." His eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this, maybe," I said. "But not as much as you'll regret underestimating me." When he finally left, Jacob let out a low whistle from the doorway. "Where did that come from?" I smiled faintly. 3 months of eating out of dumpsters. You learn to stop apologizing for existing. Later that evening, while going through old company files, I found a drawer in my uncle's cabinet labeled S. Hartfield. Confidential inside were printed articles. my wedding announcement, news of my divorce, even court transcripts. But beneath the papers was a sealed envelope, my name written in my uncle's handwriting. My breath caught as I turned it over. On the back were 3 words: "Start where we ended." I stared at the note until my hands shook. What did he mean? Before I could think further, my office light flickered, once, twice, and then went dark. For a second, I swore I saw someone standing in the reflection of the glass wall behind me. But when I turned around, the room was empty. The lights flickered again the next morning. Jacob joked it was old wiring, but I knew better. Hartfield Design Group didn't have old anything. This was someone trying to rattle me, and it was working. I hadn't told anyone about the letter I found, or the words scrawled on the back, "Start where we ended." Those 5 words had been living rent-free in my head all night. Where we ended, the day we stopped speaking. 10 years ago, the last place I saw my uncle was his studio, this same office just before he threw me out. He'd been standing near a drafting table surrounded by blueprints, staring at me like I'd betrayed him. Now I stood in that same room, looking at that same table, and something about it felt. If I ran my fingers along the wood edge and felt a small bump, a hidden groove. I pressed. A section of the table popped open, revealing a narrow compartment underneath. Inside was a rolled-up sheet of paper tied with string. When I unrolled it, my heart stopped. It wasn't a building plan. It was a map, a blueprint of the Hartfield mansion itself, the one I was staying in. But there were strange markings on the 5th floor, my studio. 2 small X's, side by side, with a handwritten note beside them. The foundation of everything begins above. I didn't understand it, but it was definitely meant for me. Before I could study it further, my office door creaked open. Working late again? It was Jacob, holding 2 cups of coffee. I quickly folded the blueprint and slid it into a folder. Just catching up, he handed me a cup. Carmichael's been in the conference room for an hour, talking to a few of the board members. "You're on his mind." "Good," I said. "I like being a nightmare," Jacob smiled. "You've got guts, Hartfield. But be careful. You're shaking the tree, and some of those branches bite back." After he left, I locked the folder in my drawer and headed home to the estate. By midnight, curiosity won. I climbed the stairs to my studio and compared the blueprint to the room layout. The X's lined up with a section of wall behind the drafting boards, the same wall that held my old college sketch. Heart pounding, I lifted the frame. Behind it, the wallpaper looked newer than the rest. I tugged a corner. It peeled away easily. Beneath it was a hidden panel. I pressed once, nothing, then twice. Click, a small compartment popped open, revealing a wooden box wrapped in dust. I held my breath, opened it, and found a flash drive. Inside was a label written in my uncle's handwriting. "For Sophia, when she's ready." My throat tightened. Ready for what? I plugged it into my laptop, and a single folder appeared. Project Eden. But before I could open it, a message flashed across the screen. Access restricted. Password required. I sat there in silence, staring at the words, and that's when I realized whoever had been messing with the office lights might have been searching for this too. Someone else knew it existed. The word Eden stayed on my screen like a heartbeat. I couldn't silence. I tried every password I could think of. My birthday, his, the firm's founding date. Nothing worked. It was like the system was guarding his secret even from me. By the 3rd failed attempt, the screen went black. Then, suddenly, a message appeared. "If you've forgotten who you are, start where you dreamed." I stared at it, confused. Then it hit me. When I was a kid, Uncle Theo used to ask what my dream city would look like. I'd draw entire skylines, floating parks, glass bridges, eco-homes shaped like shells. I'd name the project Eden, after the idea of rebuilding paradise from ruins. That was the first design he'd ever praised me for. Could this be the same Eden? I spent the rest of the night digging through his old files, looking for anything labeled Eden. Most were locked behind encryption, But one folder, buried under archived designs, contained something strange. Scanned letters, dated 3 years ago. They weren't addressed to clients. They were addressed to Richard Hale. My stomach turned. Richard, my ex-husband. One letter read, "If you continue interfering with Hartfield projects, I will take legal action. Stay away from Sophia. She deserves a life untainted by your greed." Another said, "Eden belongs to her, not you." No deal will change that. I gripped the edge of the desk. So this was the fight my uncle had been in before he died. Richard had been trying to steal my uncle's designs. And Eden, whatever it was, must have been worth millions. The next morning I walked into the office, trying to look calm, even though my pulse hadn't slowed since midnight. Jacob was already there, reviewing model layouts. "You look like you fought a ghost," he said. "Close," I replied. "Tell me, did my uncle ever mention something called Project Eden?" His brow furrowed. "Only once, a few months before he passed. He said it would change the skyline forever. Then he went quiet about it. No one's seen the files. What if someone else has?" I asked quietly. Jacob's eyes sharpened. "What are you saying?" "Someone's been tampering with the system. And my ex-husband might be involved?" He froze. "The same guy who—" "Yes," I said. "And I think Carmichael knows more than he's admitting." Jacob glanced toward the glass wall where Carmichael stood talking to 2 board members, his smile thin and practiced. "Then we'd better find Eden before he does," Jacob said. I nodded, because I have a feeling my uncle didn't die of old age. That night, I opened the hidden folder again, tracing the word Eden on the screen. Somewhere behind those encrypted files was the truth about my uncle, my marriage, maybe even his death, and I was done being afraid to look for it. We started digging the next morning, quietly. Jacob handled the tech. He was better with the company's systems, while I focused on physical records. The Hartfield archives were hidden in a locked sub-basement that smelled like old wood and cold metal, a place most of the younger staff didn't even know existed. "You know," Jacob said, as he pried open a file drawer. "This is the part in the movie where someone always says, 'Maybe we shouldn't be doing this.'" I smirked. "Then don't say it." We spent hours sifting through blueprints, contracts, emails. Dozens of projects labeled with numbers, H17, H23, H40. But buried in one folder marked decommissioned concepts, Jacob found something strange, a blueprint labeled EDN01. It wasn't just a design. It was an entire urban plan. Housing, solar infrastructure, parks, all self-sustaining, all built on reclaimed land. The signature at the bottom made my chest tighten. Designed by Sophia Hartfield, concept. Theodore Hartfield, architectural lead. My childhood sketches. He'd turned my dream into a real proposal. "Oh my God," I whispered. "He built this from my drawings." Jacob scanned the rest of the file. "Look at this. The project was halted 3 years ago due to financial irregularities. But the funds didn't vanish. They were redirected." "To where?" He frowned, flipping through pages. "A shell company called RH Holdings. The initials hit me like a punch." "Richard Hale," Jacob froze. "Your ex-husband?" "Yes," I pointed at the timestamp. "This transfer happened a month before my uncle cut me out of his will. Or so I thought." He looked at me sharply. "You think Richard stole from your uncle?" "I think he tried to steal Eden, and my uncle stopped him. Maybe that's why the project vanished." Just then, footsteps echoed down the hall above us. Jacob glanced up. "We're not supposed to be down here, are we?" "Not technically." The footsteps grew louder, closer, stopping right outside the archive door. We froze. A shadow appeared through the frosted glass. Then, the handle turned. Jacob quickly shut off the light, and we pressed against the filing cabinets, holding our breath. The door creaked open, and a beam of light from a phone swept across the room. Carmichael's voice cut through the darkness. "I know you're in here." My pulse slammed in my ears. He stepped inside, his shoes clicking against the floor. "You think I don't notice when files go missing?" Jacob grabbed my wrist. We ducked behind the tall cabinets, moving silently toward the side exit. When Carmichael's flashlight swung the other way, we slipped out, our hearts pounding. We didn't stop running until we were outside on the service stairwell, gasping for breath. Jacob finally spoke. He's covering something, and if he finds out what we've seen, he won't, I said. Because by then, I'll have already exposed him. But as we reached the top of the stairs, I noticed something wedged under the door handle. A folded note. My name. My uncle's handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. If you found Eden, then you found the reason I'm gone. My stomach turned cold. Whatever my uncle had started, someone had finished. I didn't sleep that night. The note from my uncle sat on the table like a ghost, quiet but impossible to ignore. If you found Eden, then you found the reason I'm gone. Gone. Not dead. Gone. He'd chosen that word for a reason. By morning, Jacob and I were back in the office before anyone else. He'd pulled system logs from 3 years ago, the time when Project Eden disappeared. What am I looking at? I asked. He pointed to the screen. These are access records from the firm's secure server. Your uncle's last login was at 11:47 p.m., 3 nights before his car crash. I frowned. That's the night he supposedly stayed at the office. Jacob zoomed in. Here's the weird part. There's a second login at 11:52 under his ID, except the location tag isn't here. It's from an external IP address. I leaned closer. Someone cloned his credentials. He nodded. And transferred every Eden file to RH Holdings. Richard. My blood went cold. He used my uncle's name to steal the project. Which means, Jacob said carefully, your uncle probably found out. And if he tried to stop it, I didn't let him finish. They made it look like an accident. My uncle's death. The car crash. The sealed reports Victoria said were routine. It all fit too perfectly now. Carmichael, Richard, they'd been partners. Richard provided access, Carmichael handled the money, and when my uncle threatened to expose them, they silenced him. I felt the room tilt. For a long moment, I just stared at the monitor, my reflection shaking in the glass. He knew, I whispered. That's why he left it to me. He knew I'd come back. Jacob's voice softened. Sophia, but I was already standing. I'm done hiding. If they killed him to bury Eden, I'll bring Eden back to bury them. By noon, word spread through the firm. Carmichael had called for an emergency board meeting. He was waiting in the conference room when I arrived, calm as ever. Ms. Hartfield, he said smoothly, you've been accessing restricted archives without authorization. Care to explain? Sure, I said, setting a folder on the table. Project Eden. His eyes flickered just for a second. That was all the proof I needed. I slid a printed copy of the financial transfers toward him. Millions redirected to RH Holdings, the same company my ex-husband owns. You both used my uncle's credentials to steal his designs. Carmichael's jaw tightened. That's a dangerous accusation. It's not an accusation, I said quietly. It's evidence. He leaned forward, voice low. You think anyone will believe you? You're a washed-up ex-architect who lived in a motel. I smiled, cold and steady. Maybe, but I'm also Theodore Hartfield's heir. And you just called a board meeting, in front of witnesses. Jacob slid a USB drive across the table. And the files you tried to erase? We backed them up. For the first time, Carmichael's mask cracked. His hand twitched toward the folder, but I pulled it back. I know what you did, I said. And I know who helped you. He said nothing. But that silence, heavy, cornered, guilty, said everything. Then, just as the room fell into complete stillness, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You shouldn't have opened Eden. We warned him. We won't warn you, I looked up slowly. Carmichael wasn't the only enemy watching. Someone else was still out there. By the next morning, the message was all I could think about. We won't warn you. Someone wanted me silent, just like my uncle. But fear wasn't going to stop me this time. I'd lived my whole life letting other people control the story. Now it was my turn to write the ending. Jacob and I spent the day preparing. Every document, every transfer, every blueprint was copied and backed up. Victoria agreed to call a press conference. A strategic announcement, she called it. but we both knew what it really was. It was war. At 5 p.m., I walked into the main lobby of Hartfield Design Group, wearing my uncle's old silver watch, the same one he used to check whenever a deal was about to close. Reporters were already gathering. Carmichael stood near the elevators, pretending to look calm, but his hand kept twitching at his cufflink. He hadn't expected me to fight back this fast. "Ms. Hartfield," he greeted with that fake corporate warmth. "I assume you're reconsidering your accusations?" I met his eyes. "No, I'm proving them." The room went silent. Victoria handed me the mic. "As CEO of Hartfield Design Group," I began, "I want to share a project that was stolen, one my uncle and I designed years ago. A project meant to restore hope to this city." On the screen behind me, Jacob projected the files, Project Eden. The audience gasped as the blueprints came to life. Sustainable housing, green rooftops, a city reborn from decay. It was beautiful. Then came the financial trail. Names, transfers, signatures, and at the very end, Carmichael and Richard Hale, co-owners of RH Holdings. Carmichael's composure shattered. "This is slander." "Then sue me," I said. "But you'll have to explain why your company used my uncle's password hours before he died." The reporters erupted in questions. Cameras flashed. Carmichael's face drained of color. He turned and stormed toward the elevators, and that's when Richard appeared. He stepped out, wearing the same smug smile I'd once fallen for. "Sophia," he said softly, "you don't know what you're doing." "Actually," I said, my voice shaking but steady, "for once I do." He glanced at the crowd. "You think they'll believe a broke ex-wife over a company built by men like us?" I smiled coldly. "No, I think they'll believe a dead man's voice." Jacob hit play on an audio file. My uncle's voice filled the lobby, calm, firm, recorded days before his death. "If you're hearing this, I've been betrayed. Carmichael and Hale are attempting to sell Project Eden overseas, but the design belongs to Sophia, and the world deserves to see it built here." The room froze. Reporters stopped writing. Cameras zoomed in. Carmichael's hand shook. Richard's face twisted, and in that moment, I felt my uncle beside me, proud, peaceful. Security stepped in, guiding both men away as the crowd erupted with questions. I just stood there, breathing hard, gripping the edge of the podium. It was over. Later that night, after the chaos, I stood alone in my studio. The city lights glowed through the windows, and for the first time in years, I felt safe. On my drafting table sat the original Eden sketch, my childhood dream. I picked up a pencil and started drawing again, tears blurring the lines. A quiet voice in my head whispered, "You did it, Soph." I smiled. "No, Uncle," I said softly. "We did." And as dawn broke over the skyline, I realized Eden wasn't just a project. It was a promise that even from ruin, something beautiful can rise again. 6 months later, the skyline looked different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. The press called it the Hartfield Redemption. Every week, someone asked for interviews, documentaries, keynote speeches. I said no to most of them. I didn't rebuild this company for attention. I rebuilt it because it was the only way to make peace with the ghosts that raised me. Carmichael was in prison now, along with 2 other board members who helped cover the theft. Richard's trial was next, his smirk gone, his lawyers scrambling. Sometimes I caught his name in the papers, and instead of anger, I felt nothing. That was freedom. Jacob stayed on as COO. The firm was thriving again. Young designers, new projects, real ideas. We'd restarted Project Eden from scratch. This time, under one rule: no shortcuts, no secrets. Every morning, I walked through the design floor with a cup of coffee and watched them work. The sketches, the laughter, the sound of pencils scratching against hope. Eden was finally being built, not as a dream on paper, but as real homes rising from forgotten neighborhoods. The first site opened last week, a quiet block in Brooklyn. Kids were already playing in the new courtyard by noon. Margaret cried when she saw it. So did I. After the ceremony, I went back to my uncle's studio. The same one he'd left for me, untouched except for the sunlight. On his desk sat the flash drive, the one that had started it all. I'd kept it like an artifact, a reminder that truth can hide in silence, but it never dies there. Victoria stopped by, smiling. Your uncle would have been proud. I looked around at the sketches covering the walls, the smell of wood and ink. I think he already was. She hesitated at the door. What's next for you, Sophia? I glanced at the window, the city alive below, cranes building new beginnings from old mistakes. I think, I said, it's time to stop surviving and start living. After she left, I turned off the lights and stood alone in the half-dark room. My reflection looked back. Not broken, not afraid. Just whole, I whispered to the quiet air. Thank you, Uncle, for the second chance. Outside, the skyline glowed against the evening sky, glass and light stitched together like a heartbeat. And for the first time in forever, I wasn't chasing redemption. I was home, the end.